In God We Trust was first placed on U.S. coins in the 1860s due to increased religious sentiment during the Civil War. The Secretary of Treasury received many letters from devout persons urging him to recognize God on our money. But the wording itself is older, dating back to the War of 1812, when Francis Scott Key penned our nation's anthem. The fourth verse of the Star-Spangled Banner reads in part, "Praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must, when our cause it is just. And this be our motto, in God is our trust. And the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph shall wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave." Officially, the Congress passed a law in 1956 declaring "In God We Trust" as the national motto of the United States. Trust in God is on display in the first reading, when the author of the Book of Chronicles lays out a troubling history for the Jews, but never loses his trust that God will deliver them with his great love. Israel had grown slack about their religious practices and took God for granted. The sins of the people finally cost them their freedom, and they were all sent into exile in Babylon. Their enemies tore down the holy city of Jerusalem and burned their great temple. This loss was as good as death for the Israelites. Then after 70 years in exile, God interceded by way of the Persian king Cyrus. God inspired Cyrus to send the Jews home and help them rebuild their temple. The author of Chronicles is retelling their salvation history to teach future generations of Jews to trust in God. Trust in God is an essential ingredient in holiness. For to be holy means that our life is set apart for a purpose by God. Here's the greatest statement of trust. John 3:16. "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but might have eternal life." We cannot save ourselves, so we must be totally dependent and trust God to do it. We also trust that he will help us handle all situations that arise. Here's how the saints trusted in God. St. Teresa of Calcutta said, "We are at Jesus' disposal. If he wants you to be sick in bed, if he wants you to proclaim his work in the street, if he wants you to clean the toilets all day, that's all right. Everything is all right. We must say, 'I belong to you. You can do whatever you like.' And this is our strength. This is the joy of the Lord." Mother Teresa started out by teaching daughters of wealthy families in India, but the suffering and poverty outside her classroom tugged at her heart. She said, "I had to follow Christ into the slums, to serve him, among the poorest of the poor." When Mother Teresa died in 1997, her religious order served 123 countries, with 594 locations. God called St. John Bosco to care for the young men in Turin, Italy, who were evicted from their poor families, no longer able to feed them. They wound up running in street gangs, or victims of harsh chemicals in the leather tanning industry. With hardly a dime in his pocket, St. John Bosco founded dormitories to house and feed them, while retraining them in other lines of work. By the time of his death, his religious order was running 250 houses around the world, helping 130,000 children, and graduating 18,000 apprentices annually. St. Catherine Drexel was from an incredibly wealthy family in Philadelphia. After traveling the United States by private rail car, she was shocked by the poverty on Indian reservations. During a private audience in Rome with Pope Leo XIII, she begged him to send missionaries to help neglected Native Americans. The Pope replied, "My child, why don't you become a missionary yourself?" She was cut to the heart, and used her inheritance to found 50 missions for Native Americans in 16 states, and opened secondary schools for African American students. St. Francis Cabrini served the poor Italian immigrants in America by founding schools, hospitals, and orphanages. Whenever a problem arose, Mother Cabrini trustingly asked, "Who is doing this, we or the Lord?" In similar fashion, Pope St. John the 23rd used to say, "It's your church, Lord. I'm going to bed." Our money and our nation's motto remind us, in God we trust. Holding on to that trust in God is certainly modeled by Mary, who first said yes to God's invitation of bearing Jesus in her womb, and her silent yes at the foot of the cross to give him to the world for its salvation. For St. John Paul II said, "From Mary we learn to surrender to God's will in all things. From Mary we learn to trust when all hope is gone. From Mary we learn to trust her Son, the Son of God."